Hey there, 8th graders, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the Constitution, federalism, and the Bill of Rights. Now, we're not just going to look at this document as some dusty old piece of parchment. Nope. We're going to examine it as the ultimate blueprint. It was literally designed to solve some of early America's absolute biggest problems. As we go, we'll be building a labeled model of our government to see exactly how all these moving parts work together. Let's get into it. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Fixing a broken system. 2. Modeling separated powers. 3. Checks and balances. 4. Federalism and state power. 5. The Bill of Rights. And finally, 6. Our recap and transfer. Section 1. Fixing a broken system, from rebellion to convention. So, to really understand the Constitution, we first have to understand the massive economic and political failures that actually caused it. It's your classic cause and effect arc. The nation's very first governing document, the Articles of Confederation, was just incredibly weak. By 1781, runaway inflation was completely out of control. I mean, imagine this. 146 continental dollars were worth only one single dollar in gold. It was practically worthless paper. Then in 1786, an attempt to fix trade and commerce issues at the Annapolis Convention totally failed, mostly because only 5 states even bothered to show up. It wasn't until Shays' Rebellion, which was a massive uprising of desperate farmers in western Massachusetts, that the Confederation Congress realized they had an absolute crisis on their hands. And it was that fear that forced them to authorize a secret convention in Philadelphia in May of 1787. And that brings us to a major historical claim. The framers feared that direct, unstructured democracy could lead to chaos, factionalism, and mob rule. You know, we often think the founders were only terrified of a strong king. But honestly, they were equally terrified of an ungovernable mob. Alexander Hamilton even argued that ancient direct democracies never possessed a single feature of good government and almost always ended up in tyranny. James Madison actually provided the core evidence for this claim. In his really famous essay, Federalist No. 10, he wrote, "A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention." What's really interesting here is how Madison argued that a large republic, rather than a direct democracy, was actually the best way to cure the mischiefs of political factions and keep citizens protected. Section 2. Modeling separated powers, 3 branches of government. Because of those intense fears of both kings and mobs, the founders created a brilliantly balanced structure. So let's start building our labeled model with the very first layer, separated powers. Instead of putting all the power in one person or one group's hands, the Constitution slices it right into 3 branches. Article 1 establishes the legislative branch, Congress, to make the laws. Article 2 creates the executive branch, led by the president, to execute or enforce those laws. And Article 3 sets up the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, to interpret the laws. It's like a giant puzzle where all the pieces have their own specific job. All right, it's time for our first pause check. Think back to the intense debates at the Constitutional Convention. Congress is part of the legislative branch, but it's split into 2 houses. So why did the smaller states want equal representation in the Senate? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, here is the immediate reasoning. James Madison proposed the Virginia Plan, which wanted representation to be based entirely on population. But that meant big states like Virginia would completely dominate national politics. Smaller states naturally freaked out and countered with the New Jersey Plan, demanding equal votes for every single state, no matter how small. Roger Sherman finally broke the deadlock with what we call the Great Compromise, a House of Representatives based on population and a Senate where every state gets exactly 2 votes. Problem solved. Section 3. Checks and balances, a system of limits. Now, just separating the powers into 3 branches wasn't quite enough for the framers. They knew human nature. They knew branches might try to steal power from one another, so they created a system of limits. Let's trace how this builds mechanically using Article 1, Section 7 as an example. Step 1. Congress uses its power to pass a bill. But wait, Step 2. The president can check Congress by returning it with objections. We call that a veto. It doesn't end there, though. Step 3, Congress can check the president right back by reconsidering that exact bill and overriding the veto with a 2/3 vote. They're absolutely forced to share power. Section 4, Federalism and state power, dividing power across levels. So we've talked about balancing power horizontally across the 3 branches in Washington, but our labeled model has a vertical layer too. This is called federalism. It's a system of government where power is structurally divided between a central national government and local state governments. Remember, the founders had just fought a brutal war to escape a distant, all-powerful central authority in Britain. They wanted to make absolutely sure local communities still had a strong say in how they were governed. Let's look at how these powers contrast. The Constitution specifically lists or enumerates the national powers in Article 1, Section 8. These are huge things that affect the whole country, like declaring war, coining money, and regulating foreign commerce. On the flip side, the 10th Amendment clearly states that any powers not delegated to the United States government are reserved to the states. Time for our second pause check. Based on this system of federalism we just talked about, why can't a single state, like New York or Texas, sign a peace treaty with a foreign country? Think about where that boundary line of power is drawn. So the crucial point is found directly in the evidence of Article 1, Section 10. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation. The reasoning here is immediate and clear. Foreign policy is strictly a national power. If individual states were running around making their own treaties, the United States wouldn't be very united, would it? Section 5. The Bill of Rights, protecting individual liberty. We've balanced the branches, and we've balanced the national government with the states. Now we need the final component of our model, balancing government authority itself with the rights of everyday individual citizens. There's a deep philosophical tension here. On one hand, we need a government strong enough to protect us and our property, right? But on the other hand, we also need to be protected from that very government. So, where exactly is the line between our personal liberty and the government's responsibility to maintain order? Well, when the Constitution was first sent out to the states for approval, a massive fight broke out over this exact question. The historical claim from the Anti-Federalists was that the new Constitution would consolidate all power into a national government. They fiercely argued it was just mimicking the corrupt British regime they just escaped and would end up robbing citizens of their liberties. Ultimately, to salvage the ratification of the Constitution, the Federalists had to step up and promise to add explicit, written protections. And those written promises? They became the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, ratified in 1791. This brilliantly illustrates the specific boundaries placed on government action. The First Amendment protects your freedom of speech, religion, press, and assembly. The Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms. The Fourth protects your house from unreasonable searches. And the Fifth guarantees due process of law and protects you from self-incrimination. The government simply cannot cross these lines.
Section 6. Recap and Transfer. The Great Balancing Act.
Wow, we have covered a lot of ground today, assembling all the vital pieces of the United States Constitution. Let's quickly synthesize the parts of our labeled model. Here is your core takeaway. The Constitution was caused by the severe economic crises and rebellions under the weak Articles of Confederation. To fix it without accidentally creating a tyrant, the framers used separated powers across 3 distinct branches. They implemented checks and balances so those branches can limit each other. They used federalism to share power vertically between national and state governments. And finally, they added the Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties. And why this matters? Because this isn't just ancient history. It's the exact same blueprint running our country right now today. I'll leave you with this final, provocative transfer question to think about. How does this constitutional model of balancing power shape the political debates we see in our government today? Next time you watch the news, look closely for the branches checking each other or the states arguing with Washington. It's all part of the design. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking great questions.